Welcome to Empowered. I'm your host, Jessica Flynn of thejessicaflynn.com, and our show is on a mission to unleash local wisdom for widespread impact. We are committed to inspiring positive change in our corner of the world and beyond. Today, we're exploring how one department inside of our local college is reimagining what's possible for students, for communities, and for the future of social change. Today's guest is Nicole Norris, the Director of Social Innovation at Georgian College. A seasoned design professional and systems thinker, Nicole leads a team of change makers working at the intersection of education, community, and inclusive futures. From participatory research to design-led problem solving, Nicole is passionate about reimagining how colleges can be catalysts for social and economic change locally and globally. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Nicole Norris to the show. Thank you so much for taking time out of what's a very, very busy schedule in very different time zones to do the work that you do.
I'm really happy to be here, and this is actually kind of exciting. I was really excited when you extended this offer. So
I've just fallen head over heels in love, in respect for the work that your department is doing, not just for the school community, but for the wider community. So the more platform we can give to share the story of this work, it's our honor to do so. So to kick us off though, like starting right at the beginning, what is your definition and the department's definition of social innovation?
That's a good one. So I get asked that a lot.
Yeah.
There's two ways I can answer that. One, I usually say it's systems change, full stop. So this idea that if in any way, shape, or form that we look at the world and some people get invited to the table, some people don't. There's many reasons for that. But are there ways that we can start looking at the world differently and bringing in different perspectives? That bring flourishing, health and well-being back to our communities, or a new type of that moving forward. So I think for me, the other way that I look at it, and I've said this before too, it's a conversation around values some days, and some days that can get really uncomfortable when we're discussing values. Things like, do you fundamentally believe everyone deserves a house? Do you believe everybody fundamentally should have access to fresh and healthy food? And most people might say, well, absolutely. But then you can dig a little deeper into that and say, okay, but what if somebody has addictions, doesn't have the ability to work due to mental health? Are they still afforded the same rights and the same access?
Big conversations you're having in the community.
Yeah, so that's the definition of that. Those are
innovation is essentially change or new and growth, looking at things differently. And so the social is looking at things differently around people. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's changing our relationships to what we think is right and wrong, and who we believe gets to make decisions and who doesn't. And to that point too, like when we also, one of the interesting things about my role at Georgian, so I sit under an area called Research, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship at Georgian, and that actually has three areas where we have, our ability is to bridge working in the community on innovation, and hopefully bringing that back into the college for student learning, so that we're building new leaders of the future. We're embedding that type of thinking into individuals that are going to go out and they're going to work in our communities, they're going to shape our communities. So in that area, we have research and innovation, and their mandate is to really work and build in sort of the industry sector. So we're talking about Industry 5.0, we're talking about AI, the digital space, but also, sort of different modes of manufacturing, different types of business models. We have the Henry Burnick Entrepreneurship Center, so they work in the startup space, so a lot of programs where they're working with newcomers, different diverse equity groups, or individuals that have always wanted to start a business, mentorship, access to funding, that sort of thing. And then there's us, social innovation, and so we sit in sort of the community space. Working with organizations like the YMCA, working with new types of schools, new alternative schools that want to come up. Any of our community organizations that are working on the social space. And what's really interesting about that is each area has a different definition of innovation. And so this is the interesting part that I always...
You say interesting, also challenging.
Also challenging.
Yeah.
So what we do know is that traditionally, from my experience, innovation is usually owned with the idea that we're outputting potentially a commercial product, we're potentially outputting a digital product, or we're potentially outputting something tangible.
Like this concrete measurement.
Yeah,
of
like
this
and
work.
it's producing, it's going to the economy, or it's producing a profit. Well, in community, that's not always necessarily the focus.
Right.
So
if money isn't the metric, how do you measure success?
you got
innovation?
it. So what we measure matters, and we can have a whole conversation about GDP and what it does matter, or what it does measure and what it doesn't measure. But social innovation is different, and so there's a huge. This idea of innovation is not new in a community. It could have looked like community development. It could have been collective impact. But there's this nuance, I think, with social innovation across Canada now, where we're really starting to define this space, is recognizing that it's different types of research, it's different types of engagement, it's trust building, it's, you're right, changing what we measure, because not everything in community can roll up to a GDP.
Yeah. So I have a question about your process. So you have a background in community-based design and participatory research. So can you talk to us about the approach of your department with that participatory component?
Yeah, so actually I spent about 18 years in the corporate world. I was actually a product designer for a long time. So I was actually a contributor to some of the waste that we see in the world. I actually worked in the technology.
Listen, we all have been, so to come on the other side, it's okay.
Yeah, so I'm a reformed capitalist.
You have to know how it works to then change it, right?
Yeah, so I'm a reformed capitalist. So just to kind of answer that question, right? So when I graduated, in education, what was really interesting is I never in a million years thought I would actually be in the post-secondary sector or education, whatever. I was on a track, man. I was like business, I was design. I studied design at OCAD University twice. So I did my undergrad.
Couldn't get enough.
Yeah, I couldn't get, I loved it. So I did my undergrad and my master's there. And what was really great about that was, it was kind of the first time, so how you're trained as a designer, and like this is way back, playback, right? And the emergence of design at the time was really, that was when businesses were starting to say, we want to think like a designer. And what they were essentially meaning was, how do we put the user or the human at the center of the issue, right?
And so that's the curtain behind human-centered design thinking.
Yeah, human-centered design thinking, you've heard about it, which is cool. Like that was, so at the time I was totally into that, like design thinking. But then as you realize, you ask that question, well, what human are we putting in the center? And if that human is got different cultural experiences, they're not necessarily from a Western perspective, maybe it's an indigenous, a completely different worldview. How does that shift and change how you design something? And what does the designer play? So that became really interesting throughout my career and as I moved along. So when we set up the Department of Social Innovation at Georgian, I got to give Georgian a lot of credit because entering into this space by bringing in something like a social innovation or change making, you're really kind of walking into a room and challenging the status quo. So I really realized early on when I shifted, like I came to Georgia and I shifted over from sort of a corporate mentality, I was like, where did I land, first of all? Second of all, it was the first time in my life ideas mattered over necessarily profit. So that's one of the things I really liked about that. But then as I started to work in this space and say, okay, I've spent many, many years designing products, digital aspects, and the students were working, when I came, the students were working on social problems and applying design to it. I was like, we could bring a lot more structure to this and get them to really understand from a design perspective how that works. So for instance, we're sitting in this room, there's this table here, there's these mugs, these chairs, somebody designed these. So absolutely everything in our world's designed. Education systems are designed, policies are designed, our cars are designed, and at some point, somebody's made a decision, but it may not fit you.
And I think some of those designs are revisited more frequently than others. So when we're talking about systems change and
Correct.
social structures, when's the last time that we've, looked critically at that system? Is it serving us well? And who is us now? Has that changed?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we saw that in the pandemic, right? When we saw the, sort of the resurgence of Black Lives Matter movement, and we all had to take a pause. Like I like to call the pandemic the Great Pause. Where we really have to, analyze who those systems were. But to that point, like, here's a great example. Like, up until a certain time period, cars were not tested with test dummies that were calibrated to a woman's body type. So there was a time where, as a woman, you were exponentially higher to be able to killed in an automobile accident because they didn't take into account our hip structure and our actual physical body structure in that context. And so now they crash test cars with those dummies, like with a female type dummy. Other aspects.
Things that a consumer would just hopefully assume that these are being done.
Things about women's health, or even, not even white women's health, but like a Black woman's health or an Asian woman's health. These weren't things even on the radar, and how different systems exploited that. So revisiting those. So when we think about social innovation at Georgian, and we built the department, and we're starting to build that department, that idea of participatory design is just that, right? So the designers are there to sort of hold space, or our team is there holding space. It's asking questions like, how do we get invited, not inviting others to the table?
Or inviting yourself to their table.
Or whatever that is. How are we holding space? And at Georgian, as social innovation or other partners that we work with, we hold immense amount of resources and capitals. So how do we get out of the way? Or how do we use our capital and our influence to get out of the way, or move systems out of the way, so that those who traditionally are being marginalized or are having to hack their own well-being, they don't necessarily need our help. They just kind of need us to get out of the way in some respects.
And I imagine there's some work to do in building trust of, coming as an institution with this opportunity for those marginalized communities to actually trust that you really do want to listen and be a part of a conversation. Yeah,
absolutely. And one of the important decisions I think we made on our team was to actually hire a social worker as one of our lead researchers. So, also approaching this concept of research differently. Research traditionally for many communities was extractive. The data hasn't been returned. It's been used to foster the researcher's agenda. And, the context of where we work in colleges, when we talk about education at colleges, it's applied learning, which is experiential. When we talk about research, it's applied research. So you're working with community, alongside community. And so when we look at that in sort of a community context, we also have to recognize that in some cases we have to be much more trauma informed. We have to recognize traditionally experiences with research. How do we compensate community for sharing their lived experience, if they even want to share their lived experience?
Right.
And as a team ourselves, and we had this conversation this morning on one of our meetings, this idea of safety for the participants, but also safety for our facilitators. Because in order to do this work, one of the deepest things I've learned is that we can only go as far as the work we've done with ourselves. So that means that we have to look inside of our internalized racism, our internalized homophobia. We have to look at that within ourselves.
As the facilitator, as that leader of the conversation, what am I bringing to the table, whether I intend to or not? I think what Georgian is doing in this work is beyond anything that many of us think is going on behind doors at Georgian, and it's obviously so needed. So we are going to come back with Nicole, learn a little bit more about their community impact labs and the work being done in our communities. Stay tuned to Empowered with Jessica Flynn. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm your host, Jessica Flynn, and today we're chatting with Nicole Norris, the Director of Social Innovation at Georgian College. I feel like we could have our own entire show series about all the things. We're still on cue card 1, and I've got a few. So we're really just touching the surface today because there's so much deep, impactful work going on in your department with your team at Georgian. Can you tell us a little bit of the story behind Future Story and Georgian's collaboration with the YMCA?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I say, our department is about 2 years young. And as we were sort of...
Sorry, I didn't even realize that. You've been busy.
Yeah, so we were originally called the Center for Change Making and Social Innovation. Okay. So the work at Georgian isn't necessarily 2 years young, but the department is. And what we were trying to do is we were trying to understand in our region what would our approach be to working within community within an innovation context, right? So, you know, we could show up and be like, oh, we're gonna do this, or we could go out into the community and figure out what, from our sense of place, and we have a large region, what that means. And through that work, I guess the YMCA of Simcoe Muskoka was starting to, they had established in their strategic plan, Forward Together, and they wanted to build a culture of innovation. So they sort of did their own internal work and did, you know, traditionally what an organization would do is they're starting to look at, well, what does innovation mean, right? And is it just a new product offering, or is it sort of a fundamental transformation of the organization? And to Jill Jetman's credit, Jill Tetman, the CEO, I guess they had heard about our work and the department, and they came in for a meeting, and you know, I got to give them a lot of credit. They sat down and said, you know, so this is where we want to go, and she asked a question which was really, really interesting, which I actually thought was really compelling at the time, and I still compelling, and she said, how do we remain relevant? And I kind of looked at her and I said, that's an excellent question. And I said, we'd be happy to help you answer that. However, there's 2 caveats. One, you can't hire us, which is really interesting because traditionally a lot of community partners can come to Georgian and they can hire expertise to do the research and et cetera, and they can do that. And then it sort of becomes that partner's project.
Right.
But I said in this case, because you're the why and there's so much impact to the community, we can work together and we can answer that question together, because the question that you're answering, I fundamentally believe is the same question that Georgian is also asking.
Right. And
what I mean by that is this idea of really what she was asking was, do we belong? Not do people belong to the Y, but does the Y in institutions like the Y, do they still belong in our community?
Well, and that's the earlier part of our question of these large organizations or systems reevaluating their practices, their role. So really, kudos to her and her team for asking that tough question.
Yeah, and being brave. And so going down this route, what we decided to do was, what we understood, or what the hypothesis were, what we were thinking was, so large organizations like Georgian and the Y, like we're massive, right? Like we don't move quickly. People, they think, but you know, we're a little bit of a barge, and that's cool. And I mean, we're public institutions. We have commitments to our donors. We have commitments to the public. So fair enough. But in the context of community, you know, if you've got a need and you need to move quickly around mobilizing, you know, housing, or even like in the ice storm we just had. Like when you think about what was required, there's a lot more organizations that are more nimble and they can move quicker. But they're also closer to the community they're serving. They're also closer to the problem space. But organizations like Georgian and the Y can help, right? Like advocacy. So this idea of systems change being sort of grassroots, sort of breaking up the concrete. But then also these institutions seeing that and saying, okay, can we move that? And so I always give this equation of this analogy of the story called the rebel and the maverick. And so what I mean by that is, you know, the rebel's up there busting up the concrete and they're moving the system, but they can only get so far until the mavericks inside the system are there. So you think about the maverick, you know, walking into town, right? Whatever, but the maverick knows how to move inside the system and move the system out of the way, but they can't do it without the rebel, and the rebel can't do it without the maverick. And so this idea of belonging is okay, so institutions like Georgian and the Y want to continue their missions. They're mission-driven organizations. They're there to serve the community. It's in service, but in service to who? And if the community organizations that are out there shifting and changing the status quo are saying, this is where we need you to be in service, how are we understanding how we create this future of belonging? And that's the name of the project. And the future of the belonging has many aspects to it. And again, to this idea of trauma-informed. Belonging is going to mean different things to different groups. If you're the 2S LGBTQ plus IA community, belonging may mean love, right? It may mean access to proper health and well-being, not to be used as a political tool. If you're of the Black community, it's going to be the recognition of, the same sort of thing, the recognition that that's a whole human in front of you, and they can't change the color of their skin. So how are we showing up, and what are we doing to create that belonging? Because regardless, everybody's hacking their well-being in the way that they need, and we need to understand, because how they're shifting and changing and getting their well-beings met, that's innovation. They're the innovators. And what we have to do is recognize that's how they're shifting and changing for their well-being, and that's who we have to become for them.
So again, we have to have a whole other episode, but I'm really interested in asking, with the final 5 minutes that we have left, the fact that Georgian is an educational institution, can you tell us a little bit about, learning more about your vision of what is the role of colleges in communities? Is it changing? Or was it always there and we're just not aware of this kind of work?
I mean, I think that's a whole episode unto itself. Just because of the role that education plays in so many factors of our society.
Well, and all of this work that you're doing is then being woven into the experience of your Georgian students as well. So they're graduating with this way of thinking and operating as well, I would imagine.
Yeah, so Georgian is the first and only Changemaker college. So that we join a global community of probably 40 to 50 institutions around the world who have committed themselves to building sort of change-making and social innovation competencies within their faculty, their students, their staff. It's the idea of graduating future change-makers and change-making from the perspective of the lived experience. And so to that point, there is a fundamental difference between a college and a university. And they play different roles. One's not better than the other. They just play different roles in our communities and our societies. And particularly community colleges were designed to support the local workforce, to support the health and well-being, more to search, sort of more social determinants of health. And so that's the role we play. That's the applied learning. We work with partners. Our research is developed in combination with partners. Our faculty are not like a university faculty. Part of their job is to do research. A college faculty member's job is to do applied learning, and in order for them to do research, we have to find money for them to do that. So they're not paid to do research. And so the idea is that local industry and community can tap on our faculty who are plumbers, there are business people, but they have industry experience, and now they've come in, and our faculty are some of the most talented people because they are working faculty in a lot of respects.
And really passionate and rooted in their communities.
Very much so. And we have everything from liberal arts faculty who are passionate about communications and media and all those sort of things. Right through to our skilled trades faculty who are working electricians, and all of them are there just like me. Like I said, I've come out of 18 years of corporate. Why did I land in an educational institution? Because to me, the idea of youth and education, and this idea that knowledge and education it's a lifelong journey. So I'm here because the ideas matter, and I'm here because the impact matters. And I would probably say that 90% of our faculty, that's their same vision.
Yeah, incredible. And with the final bit of time we have here, and it's really short, for viewers watching who are not necessarily students or faculty, how do they connect with this kind of work, whether it's reading about it or exploring change making for themselves as individual humans?
Yeah, so I would say at this particular point in time, if you want to learn more about what we're doing and what the Y's doing, follow us on social media. We have Social Innovation at Georgian on LinkedIn. Follow the YMCA's channels. The other parts of this too is if you feel compelled, there's lots of opportunities to donate scholarships and funding. The college is always looking to get diverse students involved. Sometimes there's barriers in that way. So just even the idea of considering where you want to put your money in terms of that, or even just doing reading and finding more about what we're doing. We do have some infrastructure that we've started to build with the Y at our local libraries, at the Barrie Library, the Ennisville Library. These are called community impact labs, and we can talk more about those, but they're places where beyond the educational experience, if you want to make a change in your community, democratizing and making accessible those tools that can support system change.
And these are some tangible tools
Correct.
in and around the local community. So
Correct.
Unfortunately,
we just got
there. We have to wrap up, but do stay tuned for another episode of Empowered with Jessica Flynn and Nicole Norris, because we have so much more to talk about with these community impact labs and all of the incredible grassroots, boots on the ground work that our amazing Georgian College is doing. So thank you, Nicole, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you next time on Empowered. I'm your host, Jessica Flynn.